Hello everyone. Today we're going to be answering a very common question from children, which is, what are bones made of? We're going to answer that question by making a model of a bone and talking about each bit of the bone while making that part of the model. If you want to make the model along with me, you can do. I'll show you what you need in a moment, or you can just watch and see what my model bone looks like. Before we get started, have a think. What do you think a bone might be made of? Have a prediction. And then we'll get going and find out if any of your thoughts were right. Okay, so this is what you will need if you want to make your own bone model. Some Play-Doh. It could be coloured red or pink, or it could be any colour. A piece of red wool and a piece of blue wool, each about 30 centimetres long. A piece of bread with the crusts cut off. Some straws, I've got about 20 or 30 there. And a piece of thin cardboard, about 15 centimetres square. To put it together, you're going to need some glue, some sellotape, and some scissors. Right, let's get started. In the middle of your bone is something called bone marrow, and we're going to use our Play-Doh for our bone marrow. Now, we need to shape it first into kind of a flat oval shape, because we need to put something down the middle of the bone marrow. So inside the bone marrow, we have got our two strings, a red string and a blue string. Have you got an idea of what these two strings might be representing? They are the blood vessels that go into the bone marrow. The red one is the artery and the blue one is the vein. Now the artery and the vein are two different types of blood vessels and they've got different jobs. The artery brings blood to the bone marrow and to all parts of your body, and it carries oxygen. The blood carries the oxygen to all parts of your body in your blood. The blue vein, that carries the blood away from the parts of your body, away from the bone marrow, away from your muscles, and it takes that blood back to the lungs and the heart, where it will pick up more oxygen for the arteries to then take back to the parts of the body. So inside our bones, we've got veins and arteries, and they go into the middle of the bone marrow. So we need to roll the bone marrow up around the vein and the artery, and then give it a little roll, because we're going to make a long bone, like your leg or your arm bone. So we want it to be long and tube shaped. Now the bone marrow has a very interesting job. There's a clue as to what its job is, because the vein and the arteries are very important. Your bone marrow down the middle of your bones actually makes your blood. The bone marrow makes the red blood cells in your blood that carry the oxygen around your body, and it also makes the white blood cells, which have a very important job of fighting off infections in your body. The white blood cells are part of your immune system. So your bone marrow has a very important job. But the bone marrow is rather floppy. If our bones were just made of bone marrow, there'd be no good whatsoever for support, which is one of the important jobs of our skeleton, of our bones. So we need to add something to our bone marrow to give it a bit more structure, a bit more stability. And for that, we're going to use a piece of bread. This bread, it's kind of spongy. It feels spongy. It's got lots of little holes in it, which means it's quite light and squishy, which means it's a perfect match for the next layer of the skeleton, which is called spongy bone. This is the first bit of a bone which might start to look a bit like a bone. It's mostly made of calcium, but it is spongy. It's got all these air pockets in it, and that means it's very light, but still quite strong. Not very strong, it's still a little bit flexible, could be crushed if it was pressed too hard, but it's got a bit more strength to it, but it's very light. And that's important because if our bones were solid calcium salts, then they'll be really heavy and they make it very hard for us to walk. So the spongy bone surrounds the bone marrow. So we're going to wrap our piece of bread around the bone marrow to cover it completely. That is then the next layer of our bone. We've got the spongy bone, the bread surrounding the bone marrow, which has got the veins and the arteries coming out of it. So that's given our bone a bit more stability. It's not nearly as floppy as just the bone marrow was, but it's still not very strong. For the real strength of the bone, we need the next layer, which is called compact bone. So it's also made mostly out of calcium, but instead of being a spongy structure with lots of little holes in it, compact bone is made out of lots of tiny little rods. We're using straws kind of as a giant version, but in real life, each little tube would be tiny, 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 only a millimetre or two across, maybe, and even smaller. And they're hollow. So if I hold that up to the camera, hopefully you can see it's hollow all the way through. Hollow straws are actually a really strong shape. So these straws are just made out of paper, which is not strong at all, but if I push it end to end, I can push quite hard without the straw breaking, even though it's just made out of paper. So it's the same with our bones. These little tubes in our bones are called Haversian canals, and they provide the main strength of the bone. It's got lots and lots of them in our bones, so we're going to be using lots of straws, because if you're trying this at home, you might have found that you could break one straw. If you take a whole handful of straws, and don't bend them like that because they will break, but try just pushing them end to end like that, and you should find they're really quite hard to bend like that, even though they're just made out of paper, because that tube is a very strong shape. We're not going to add these onto our bone model yet, because first we need to look at the last layer of the bone, which is going to be our paper. Because if these tubes, if these bone tubes made out of calcium were on the outside of the bone, they'd be quite rough, quite bumpy. And the outside of the bone, we want to be nice and smooth. And that's what our card is going to represent. The very outside layer of the bone is called the periosteum. And that layer goes right on the outside and provides a nice, smooth, strong outer layer. This isn't made of calcium, unlike the compact bone and the spongy bone. It is made out of collagen fibres, which is a very important part of our body. It's in our skin, in our hair, in all different parts of our body. It's a very strong substance. So we need to join together our compact bone to our periosteum card. This is where the glue comes in. So cover the whole layer, the whole side of your card with glue. And then we want to arrange the straws on the glue. Oh, I haven't put them down straight. We want to get them nice and straight, lined up with the cardboard, and quite close together, but with some tiny little gaps in between them. And that'll help for the next stage. So we want to cover the whole piece of cardboard with straws, quite close together, but with some tiny gaps between them. Now the glue is holding them roughly in place, but just like that, straw's fallen off. To give it a bit more stability, we'll add some sellotape. So we just need 2 strips of sellotape, one across the bottom and one across the top, which will help to keep the straws in place. So that sellotape can then wrap around the back of the cardboard, like that. And that will then hold our straws, our compact bone, nice and firmly attached to our nice smooth periosteum, the outside layer. Now with this, can show another way how strong this compact bone is, how strong these straws are. You should find that the card bends really easily that way, but if I try and bend it that way instead, that's really strong, that doesn't want to bend, because all those straws are very strong in that direction. And that's why our straws are going to go in that direction along our bone. So just like with the bread, we need to wrap the straws around the layer. Hopefully it will just about fit. There we go. And then a last bit of sellotape to connect the ends together and secure our bone model. There we go. That is our model bone, showing all the different layers. Now that I've made it, we can show the different layers. So starting from the middle, we've got the Play-Doh, which is our bone marrow. We've got the red string, which is our artery. That takes blood that's full of oxygen to the bone and all other parts of the body. Oxygen is picked up from the lungs. We've got our vein, which takes the blood back to the lungs and the heart to pick up more oxygen for the rest of the body. The bone marrow makes the blood cells, it makes the red blood cells and the white blood cells that go into our blood. But these three by themselves are not very strong. So then we need the bread, which is the spongy bone, which starts to add a bit of strength to our bones, to our skeleton, and that's mostly made out of calcium. But it's spongy with lots of little holes in it because that makes it much lighter. Next up is the straws. That's our compact bone, which is the really strong part of our bones. The tubes that the compact bone is made up of are very light, but also very strong. This is mostly made out of calcium salts as well. Finally, we've got the smooth outside layer of the bone, which is our complicated word of the day, periosteum. Periosteum. And that's mostly made of collagen and is a nice smooth and tough outer layer of the bone, which holds it all together. So that is our bone model. Bones are a little bit more complicated than I thought they were. I hope that you found this lesson interesting, and if you decide to make your own model, enjoy.